Ah, looks perfect.
All good. All right.
Can you hear me all good?
I can hear you loud and clear.
Brilliant. Cam Speedy, you are arguably one of my favorite people to talk to. You know that, right?
Oh, thank you, Robbie. I appreciate that.
Because you're a scientist like me. You see things like me. You appreciate things in the science world. You appreciate wildlife. You appreciate conservation. You appreciate hunting being a tool in that world. But you also appreciate that hunting is not the panacea for what that needs to be. And you strike the balance in understanding ecology, ecosystem dynamics, specifically in a country like New Zealand that is dominated by non-native species that sit on a gradient of value. How did I do? Did I sum it up pretty good?
Yeah, that kind of reflects how I see the world. All of our introduced things in New Zealand are on a scale, and I refer to some of our valued ones as critters in the grey. They're not hated like rats, but they're not loved like Kiwi. So they're critters in the grey. And I wrote an article many years ago in a magazine called Critters in the Grey that talked about human value judgment around animals. And we have beautiful brumbies, wild Kaimanawa horses roaming free in the tussock in the high country of the southern Kaimanawa, and they're protected. But yeah,
What?
deer aren't. It's like,
Are they a herd of special interest? Is that Brumby a herd of special interest?
certainly a herd of special interest to the horse people. Yeah. So human value judgment is a really interesting thing, and science and politics and culture sort of collides in the middle of these critters of the grey.
Talk to me about that grading, because I obviously have. Oh, before I go on, Cam Speedy, welcome to the Blood Origins podcast. Again, welcome back again. We should have you on more often. Remind everyone who you are, where you're from.
So my name's Cam Speedy. I'm a wildlife ecologist. I live in the central North Island of New Zealand. I'm the secretary of the Seeker Foundation. I'm involved in all sorts of wildlife management in New Zealand, from protecting kiwis and our blue ducks, our seal, to pest control, possum management, and deer management. And I say management because deer are a creature that has both value and consequence, and the balance you talked about before is really important to manage that value proposition or that consequence proposition very carefully. So it is very much a management. So yeah, it's my gig. I work for myself. I live on a little 5-acre farm here in Turangi on the banks of the Tongariro River.
Everyone wants to know what it was like spending 5 days with the Blood Origins crew last year.
That was epic. It was a heap of laughs. It was a lot of fun. So Jack and Lewis and Robbie.
Did you put a wig on? Did you put a wig on when you were in the backcountry?
I put a wig on in the backcountry, Robbie. Yeah. We all did.
I did not.
Oh, didn't you?
Let's get this straight. I did not.
You piker.
Talk to me. I want to explore this whole gradient thing, this critters in the grey, because I have my own hypothesis or maybe like theory on this gradient of non-native species in New Zealand. But I want to hear from you. How do you segregate that out?
Well, I don't, as an ecologist. A classic example is trout, rainbow trout, a devastating aquatic predator that lives in all our waterways. It's had a huge impact on our native fisheries. It's protected by law. It can be fished under license, and it generates huge amounts of revenue. But it's an introduced predator that lives in our waterways. And in fact, the National Parks Act, for non-native species to exist without persecution in our national parks, they have to have a determination under a particular section of the National Parks Act that is
by the Conservation Authority, right?
Given by the Conservation Authority, that they do not need to be eradicated. And trout have that in all the national parks in New Zealand. Go figure. Go figure.
But Cam, that's a value. That has a value. And I think that's one of the things where obviously I think about it ecologically as well, but you've also got to think about it socially. And socially brings the value component to it. And in my brain, a rat, a mouse, a stoat, a hedgehog, dare I say a turkey for New Zealanders. I love turkey hunting, so you guys like turkeys. But there really isn't a value chain there, versus when you slip over on the other side of the sort of, in my brain, the middle ground, you've got deer that are valued. You've got goats that are valued. You've got pigs that are valued. To me, there's a difference between the two. Is there not a difference in your brain between the two?
Yeah, it's a cultural thing, eh? It's a human value judgment thing. So I struggle that kaimanoa horses are protected and trout are protected, but deer are considered a pest in law. Well, until more recently, they're starting to be seen more as a valued, introduced species. Sorry.
Cam, you should have told the whole world that you were on a very important podcast.
Sorry, bro. I'll turn this off.
But isn't that so? Let's explore that a little bit. The kaimanoa brumbies, the rainbow trout, both non-native, both protected, so that technically, if I understand law correctly, there is precedence already to get something like the wapiti herd protected from persecution.
100%. Yep.
Same with sika. Same with tar.
100%. So it's a social thing. It's a social value judgment of our New Zealand society about what we want. So, unfortunately, deer have had a checkered history of mismanagement, ad hoc management, exploitation, and depending on the prevailing situation of deer density and deer impact, the value is either loved or hated by different sectors of society, and who governments of the day come and go. And with politics, there are those who have influence when particular politicians hold the purse strings to Treasury, and those who don't. And that pendulum swings back and forth. As an ecologist, nature isn't black and white. Nature is always winners and losers, going through time on a knife edge. That's how nature works. It's called evolution. And where we've thrown the system into chaos, we have an obligation to try and carefully manage it. That's what I see my role as a scientist, as a wildlife ecologist, to help navigate those scientific things. But don't make no mistake, they have a deep cultural and social component also.
But the political landscape has teetered now, since your past elections.
Yes, it has.
Has teetered in favor of hunting, or in favor of potential value-add, human-based judgment of these hunted species.
Yeah, well, there's two things. The government doesn't want to spend money. Oh, there's three things, actually. The government doesn't want to spend money if it doesn't have to. Taxpayer money's under the pump right now. They want to add value wherever they can in terms of a value chain. If you can use a resource and create economic activity from that resource. And also, they're really into passion communities getting involved in getting shit done. Those are three very, very strong reasons that the government of the day should want to see hunter-led management for species like our wapiti, our tahr, and our sika, and our other valued game animals.
Well, in talking to the three of you last year, three of you being you, Snow with tahr, Roy with wapiti, the reason we focused on the three of you was because of that passion. You have an organization, and I hate to dog on them a little bit, but they are the flavor of the month down there right now, given some stupid decisions that they're making. But Forest and Bird has, they've got a wildlife conservation bend to them. And I told this to Roy. I was like, Roy, what's the deal here? Because if you surveyed Forest and Bird's membership and asked them, what is the point of Forest and Bird? The point of Forest and Bird is to protect native flora and fauna, iconic native fauna and flora of New Zealand. Well, what is it that you are doing, Roy, that's against that? The mahi, the hard work that you're putting in a landscape that is as inhospitable as anywhere in the world. Like, where is the rub here, right? Where is the and essentially, I guess I just want to maybe hear from you, like, who else is in these spaces doing these passion-driven exercises of, trap work and whatnot at the scale that, say, the Sika Foundation is doing, the scale that the Wapiti Foundation is doing, 175,000 hectares. I'm sure there's small groups all around New Zealand, but are there any non-hunting based organizations doing that much mahi?
Yeah, there is in a lot of places. There is a lot of community passion in the pest control space to protect things like kiwi, especially. There are a lot of businesses who are stepping up. Anya and I, my partner, are going to Fiordland next week on a pure salt conservation voyage, and that's about their business, which is basically a recreation boat for divers, hunters, nature lovers, fishers, going to Fiordland and trapping predators on islands to support the conservation efforts for things like kakapo and kiwi and weka. So there's a huge
number of... What company was that? Pure Salt, did you say?
Pure Salt, yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, like Sean and Maria are really stepping up in the conservation space as giving back through their business to the place that they operate in. It's a great model, and there's a lot of businesses that do that. Here on the Tongariro River, there's a company called Tongariro River Rafting, which have invested in hundreds of traps up the Tongariro River to protect field, to bring field back to the river, and they run eco tours on the rafting business on the river, specifically looking and showing people the blue duck story. So, there's a lot of businesses stepping up into that space, and this government loves business that gives back, loves business that saves the taxpayer money, loves business that leverages off wildlife and generates economic activity. I think, sadly, for Forest and Bird, it's about control. They're very active in setting conservation policy. They were very active 30, 40 years ago in setting our conservation and national parks legislation. And so they, by holding the government to account on the legislation and the conservation policy that they've been very actively involved in putting in place, they're exercising a level of control that they hold the narrative. I don't think that's very democratic myself. That New Zealand's a very diverse place, and there's a lot of energy out here that could be used in so many ways to make such a difference. So, there's a little bit of a disconnect for sure.
It'd be one, my pipe dream always is to have someone like Forest and Bird say to Fiordland Wapiti Foundation, you are doing what we want people to do in the landscape. Let's work together.
Wouldn't that be awesome, eh? Isn't that what collaboration is all about? Conservation, community
Well, could you just
conservation.
imagine them together? Like, it would blow people's minds. It would show the true, like, hey, look, we may not be doing exactly what we want, forest and bird, for field and wobbly, we may not be doing exactly what we want, so both sides aren't getting exactly what they want. And so the middle ground is the compromise, which is where everybody needs to be.
100%. Yep, I agree. Wouldn't that be a wonderful vision? Everybody working together with a similar outcome and a similar vision.
Well, Cam, you've been in the non-native, again, I don't want to say invasive species space, but let's just call it the non-native control space. It's an expensive place to work in, right?
It is, yep, especially in landscapes that are rugged and remote, for sure.
So from an ecologist perspective, I want to know more about, eradication. Eradication is a word that's used and thrown around a lot, and it is a goal of goals. You have to be incredibly visionary. We have to want something like that, but ecologically, and maybe not ecologically, maybe logistically, is it even possible?
Well, New Zealand leads the world in eradication on islands. Our island conservation expertise is in demand all around the world. New Zealand has eradicated a lot of different things off a lot of different islands. Myself, I've been involved in eradication through my career. We've started building predator-proof fences that stop everything getting back in and eradicating everything within the fence up to a scale of thousands of hectares. But for eradication to be achieved, you have to do two things. You have to put every single individual at risk. You have to be able to put every single individual at risk. You have to be able to kill animals faster than they breed. And there has to be no chance of reinvasion. If those three criteria can't be met, then you will not achieve eradication. And of course, on an island, you can do that because there's a large moat of water around that island, which allows the reinvasion to be managed, notwithstanding a fishing boat going ashore and bringing rats back. But then you have monitoring and detection systems on those islands to be very sure that nobody gets back. And then the cost.
Now, Cam, what about that famous rower who rowed across and did his predator work, and he rowed back and he did it for years and years and years and years, and then one day he was rowing back and a stoat swam past him to the island and he said, "I'm done."
Yeah, Richard Henry on Resolution Island. He was in Central Otago when the settlers released ferrets and stoats to manage the rabbit plagues that had occurred in the 1880s. And he said, shit, there's going to be some problems here. And so he went to Fiordland and started gathering up treasures like kakapo and kiwi and putting them on islands. And within 10 years of stoats being released in Central Otago around Wanaka and Queenstown, they were already swimming across the Acheron Passage onto Resolution Island. They're devastating predators. Yeah, he was considered a leader in New Zealand's conservation, but we have technology to go to islands like Campbell Island and the Antipodes Islands and the subantarctics. Macquarie Island just been done, and eradicate rabbits and goats and pigs and rats and cats. Maungatautari, where I was involved behind the pest-proof fence in the Central North Island, we got rid of 14 species of 3,500 hectares behind the fence. And it's now got kakapo back in it. It's a mainland island with kakapo and so many kiwi that they're harvesting kiwi every year off Maungatautari to recolonize other areas. So eradication is achievable, but it's achievable on a relatively small scale. It's very expensive. The Kapiti Island possum eradication in the mid-80s, the first possum cost a few dollars. The last possum cost over $8,000. Yep. The last few are incredibly expensive to get because they've beaten you because of behavioural things, or because perhaps you've given them a trap scare or a fright and they're now totally neophobic. So, eradication is not something to be entered into lightly. It's incredibly expensive, and it has to meet those 3 strict criteria to be achievable. If it's not achievable, then we're into a thing called management. Eh? And if that's not what the Wapiti Foundation are doing, I don't know what is.
Should the game in New Zealand, in Australia, because you guys have very similar climates, should the game for deer be management versus eradication?
Of course it should be. Management is not achievable, especially where you've got venison farming, deer farming going on. There's always the risk of escapes.
You mean eradication's not feasible?
Eradication's not feasible, no. So we're limited to managing for outcomes. And we can set outcomes that we want a particular density that achieves a particular habitat quality. And so there's the balance. These type of habitat outcomes from these sorts of deer densities, how far do you push the deer density down to allow the habitat to get to that environmental threshold? And that's exactly what the Sika Foundation is doing in the Kaimanawas right now. We are pushing the Sika herd down and down and down and down and down. The first thing we've noticed is that the hinds have gone from skinny, unproductive hinds to fat, highly productive hinds. So they're pushing back harder than ever. They're all having fawns again. So we've got to run to stay still. The more productive the herd is, the harder you've got to work to keep suppressing. So, it's a very dynamic situation, and we don't know enough about what those environmental thresholds are. They're probably different in different places for different soil types, for different habitats, for different species. And so we haven't invested in that understanding. All we've done is invest in, deer are bad, just find ways of killing them, or, to be more efficient at killing them. Actually, we know that we need to control females. So if you want to suppress a herd, you take the reproductive base out. You target your management at the female breeding base. And there's the value proposition, is that females inflict most of the environmental damage because of their sedentary matriarchal family group lifestyle, and males are mostly nomadic and they spread their environmental impact across vast landscapes. So actually, hunters value males, and their environmental impact is spread and relatively low compared to females, who do most of the environmental damage at place because of the hierarchical female family group situation. So in understanding the lifestyles of game animals, we can be really, really smart at how we manage them. Once we discover the thresholds, the environmental thresholds, we can push down, particularly on the females, to achieve those thresholds. It's totally doable. Eradication, nah. The harder you push down, the harder they push back, the smarter they get, the more they avoid you, the more you've got to change your tools up. We've already seen that in the Kaimanawas. We started with recreational hunters. We then moved to more conventional search and destroy with a helicopter. And now we've gone to thermal assisted control, because they're so hard to get. They hold in tight cover, and they're very, very difficult to get once they've been put under a bit of pressure. So, it's called management, and we're learning all the time.
Cam, do you think, one of the things that we're dealing with over here in the United States is very similar to obviously what you do, and I use you guys as an example all the time. Catalina Island has a conservancy on it right now. It's an island off of California, and they want to eradicate mule deer. And obviously their goal is restoration of biodiversity from a flora perspective specifically. And I keep pushing back on them to say, you can meet your biodiversity objectives without eradication. So from your experience, are you seeing biodiversity objectives, biodiversity outcomes with management and the suppression of the deer herd?
In places we are. In the Fiordland Alpine zone, there's quite a lot of intensive monitoring going, and while there still is a certain level of browse, the browse thresholds that have been set are being met by the current density targets and management. The problem for ungulates in particular, tahr, deer, goats, is that they have favoured plant species, and they'll target those favoured plant species. Often those favoured plant species are highly productive, and other biodiversity depend on them as well. And you have to reduce densities to incredibly low levels to get full biodiversity recovery. And we don't know what those densities are for most habitats. May I ask, on Catalina Island, are mule deer introduced there? So they are non-native?
100 years ago.
100 years ago.
100 years ago. But they've also had goats. They also had pigs. Those have been eradicated. They also have bison. But they also have a very small human community that absolutely loves the deer walking around the city.
Okay. So I mean, you could tweak the herd structure so that it was heavily, the females were heavily suppressed. So that controls the breeding base, and it means that you aren't got a whole lot of fawns being dropped every breeding season, but you still had a few bucks running around with antlers. Yeah, you'd have to determine what the biodiversity recovery looks like for those interested in that outcome, and whether eradication was required. I mean, New Zealand always had browse from large herbivorous birds, so New Zealand forests without browse aren't natural either, you know. So I don't know about Catalina Island. What were the browsers on Catalina Island 1,000 years ago? You know, there must have been something utilizing. Sorry.
Yeah, there might have been something utilizing, but there's the other question. You said, you know, what does it look like 1,000 years ago? Should that be an objective writ large? Just forget about Catalina Island. Let's talk about New Zealand. Should that be an objective of ours today, to return the system to what it was 1,000 years ago?
Oh, we can't. The wrecking ball has been rolling down the mountain for 200, 300, 1,000 years, really, since Polynesian travelers arrived here and brought Kiori, the little Pacific rat, and their dogs, and started hunting. New Zealand started losing native species. That's just a classic island ecology story. We can't turn the clock back. Humans have had such a profound impact that the clock is no longer able to be wound back. So we have to impose a human value judgment on what we want as a society and what's acceptable as a society. And you have this continuum from rats to kakapo, and somewhere in the middle are these critters in the grey that we have to make a social, cultural, scientific determination on.
Well, that you just nailed it. I think that the key point here is the acceptable levels. And I think scientists often, you are one of them, I am one of them, but we've got a practical bend to us. There's certain scientists that are purists out there, and they're like, okay, we want ultimate biodiversity. And it's like, well, that comes with a huge price tag. That comes with a lot of money, wherein we could achieve 80% of that target, 80% of that like ultimate purist level for 20% of the cost. Is that acceptable?
It's up to communities to make that decision, you know.
100%. 100%.
It's not for outsiders to come and impose their own values on a community. And yes, we have international biodiversity obligations to try and protect the biodiversity of the globe. But in many places, the invasion has been so profound that we can only do it in very, very small protected areas that cost a lot of money. And you think about the Maungatautari experience here in the Central North Island of New Zealand, 3,500 hectares of temperate rainforest with no mammals living in it. That's a project that's cost tens of millions of dollars just to protect.
That's the place that you've been releasing kiwis, right?
Kakapo and kiwis, yeah, and now the kiwis are doing so well that they're harvesting kiwi chicks to take to other protected areas. Yeah, so I think that these museums, if you like to call them, biological museums give us a glimpse of what used to be. They're incredibly intense management. That's incredibly expensive. We cannot afford to do that everywhere, because we would have to borrow money from feeding families and housing families and helping sick people and looking after the elderly. Governments have a huge draw on their tax take, and biodiversity is one of those draws. And it is important, but we can't do everything everywhere. And that's the dilemma that the Department of Conservation in New Zealand is currently faced with. They can't do everything everywhere, so they're having to prioritise. So why wouldn't you leverage off passion communities?
100%. Yeah, people who want to do the work, who are going to find the work, not going to find the work, going to find the money to help leverage the work. And the Wapiti ballot is one way, self-generate money to do the work, to do the conservation work. Same situation could happen, in a seeker block, seeker ballot, tar ballot, whatnots, to invest back into those passionate communities that believe in those animals, but also believe in biodiversity objectives and want to do right things on the landscape.
But make no mistake, we aren't going to wind the clock back 1,000 years. We just haven't got the resources or the technology to do that everywhere. New Zealand has a moonshot goal of being predator-free by 2050. That's a hell of a ballsy vision and aspiration.
Is that even possible? Let's be honest.
With current technology, it's not. But there's all sorts of technology evolving and developing. So who knows what will come about in the next 20 or 30 years. And I guess people will argue that one day we may have the technology to eradicate Wapiti, and if we could, would we? Becomes the question. Would we?
So that comes down to human judgment and human value.
Correct.
And here's where I stand on this matter. I think the Wapiti brings both a societal value, an economic value, and then you can go through the intangibles, right? There's mental value, physical value, all sorts of things tied to them, right? In comparison to the biodiversity value that you're losing with them being on the landscape.
Well, we've lost so much of that biodiversity already.
Yeah, for sure. But then, if I had a technology that says to me, tomorrow you can get rid of every single feral cat in Australia, I would take it in a heartbeat. I would eradicate it. Why? Because there's no value there. There's no societal value to a feral cat. Well, somebody may argue with me there, but there's no economic value. There's really no tangible value to the feral cat in the landscape.
But there is a value in our deer species in our mountains as food, as recreation, as economic.
Just use the food argument. Just the food argument.
Well, we've got our mince project up to 6,000 kilograms now. That's gone into helping local families.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about that. You've got because that's something that we filmed that's going to come out later this year. We're going to show the impact, the work that you guys are doing. You guys are suppressing deer herds, improving biodiversity, but those suppression exercises, all the meat comes out of the field, and you guys use it, right?
Well, not all the meat, but we take as much meat as we can get or is donated by our hunters, and we distribute it to people in need. And that's a value of our game animal herds, which hasn't historically been very well seen in society. But hunters in New Zealand give so much of their meat away to friends and family, and now that's, as deer abundance has increased, that's starting to make its way into social agencies, which is an awesome value chain for these animals. So
you're still working with that same venison processor?
Yes, they've done 650 kilos in April alone, just this last few weeks. So The freezers in our local food banks are nice and full.
So just talk to somebody who has no idea what you're talking about, Cam. What does that look like?
So we're encouraging hunters to shoot a lot more hinds because there is a deer overabundance issue in many places. A lot of hunters don't like killing for the sake of killing, and leaving such beautiful produce on the hill to rot is just a terrible waste. So we've come up with a process where our hunters are able to donate their surplus meat through a processing plant that's funded by corporate sponsorship and given to food charities. So we have been rolling that since COVID pandemic, and we're up to about 6,000 kilograms now.
And I'm assuming there's more demand than there is supply, or have you satiated sort of the market in terms of the supply?
No, the demand is huge. Our problem is that we just can't get enough off the hill to give to the food banks. While we were doing our culling operations last spring, the helicopters did bring out carcasses that were donated to marae, spread amongst the old people on marae, which is the Māori term for a gathering area for their meeting house and their papakainga or living area. So yeah, a lot of those carcasses, that's over and above the 6,000 kilograms that we've had processed. We were dropping off carcasses that were distributed to Māori communities directly. Yeah, we have to be careful with the money we've got to downsize our deer overabundance issue. So collecting deer is expensive with a helicopter. We can only bring out the carcasses that are relatively cheap or virtually, the helicopters coming back to refuel can pick up a load and we can get it back to base. These are remote areas. You're talking about 10 or 15 minutes ferry each way from the back country back to the depot where the fuel dump is and the carcass dump can be with a chiller. So it's an exercise in logistics. The primary game is downsizing the hind population. The primary gain isn't feeding people, but we try to use as much of that resource as we possibly can.
Yeah. Oh man, I just remember just spending time with, I can't remember the lady's name.
Megan.
I remember Megan driving us over to see those Maori elders and just having just a sit down with the gentleman. He had his fedora hat on. It was like, go get the chair off the fence. Come have a sit down. Just absolutely wonderful time, man. I absolutely loved it. Cam, what do you think it's costing you on a yearly basis? Because you supplement money to the processor, right?
Yep. Yeah, we have corporate sponsorship that pays the processor, so that he does it at a subsidized rate, but he's not out of pocket. We supply the bags, the labels, and pay for the processing. He charges us $1 a kilo, so it's a nominal fee to cover the cost of his staff time to mince and bag the mince for us and freeze it, and that's paid for by corporates.
So,
and at the moment we've got about $2,000 a year corporate sponsorship to cover that cost.
So, and if you're processing 6,000 though, that's 6,000 New Zealand dollars.
Yeah, that's been over the last 3 years. So it's about $2,000 a year.
2,000 a year. 2,000 a year. And so if you did raise more money, you could increase the amount of venison you process on an annual basis if you could get more venison out of the field. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. So we may have to, if we had an ability to buy a couple of hours of helicopter time so that we could pay for the helicopter to bring the carcasses out of the field, as opposed to having to backload them out when the machine was coming back to refuel, which they can only pick up the easy ones that are shot in the open. The ones that are shot in the heavy cover on steep country can't be picked up. It's just too expensive.
Sure.
So the ones that are out in the open and easy to just whip in and pick up on the way back to refuel. If we had additional helicopter time, we could recover a lot more carcasses off that could go directly to Māori communities or directly to processing for social agencies.
Awesome. Cam, do you remember the last time we had a conversation about money, what I did to you?
You found us a significant amount of cash, which made a huge difference to our field protection program.
And you had no idea, right?
I had no idea, no. It was amazing.
Well, what if I said I did it again?
Oh, bro. Really?
So I have raised, and it's interesting that you said this conversation. I've got $6,000 per year for the next 2 years for you.
Wow.
That you can decide how you want to use it, but it's for a venison distribution program in New Zealand.
Wow. That will make a huge difference. So we might be able to use some of that money to not leave so much venison on the hill and get it back to the communities that really need it. Because New Zealand is having difficult economic times with inflation and interest rates and the cost of food going up, and increasingly there are working families having to go to food banks to make ends meet. And if we could help our local communities with our local deer resource, that would be just so incredible.
Well, it's done. You got $6,000 this year and you got $6,000 next year. And I don't know what that converts to New Zealand dollars. Let's have a look quickly.
Oh, I would imagine
USD
about 10,000 New Zealand
NZD.
dollars.
Let's have a look. Let's just call it 10 grand. 10 New Zealand dollars, 10,000 New Zealand dollars this year, 10,000 New Zealand dollars next year. You got it. Done.
Wow, man.
We can
Robbie,
celebrate
you're
at
a
the
legend,
Seeker
bro.
show in November, okay?
Thank you, mate. That's incredible. Woohoo!
Just buy me a beer at the Seeker show.
Absolutely. Wow. Thank you, Robbie, and thank you to Blood Origins. That's incredible.
You're welcome, my man. You're welcome. Well, I know we've had a great talk. Anything else that we skipped over that you want to talk about?
No, I just want to thank you for telling our story and showcasing some of our deer management issues around the globe. I'm sure other people have issues, similar issues or different issues, and us all sharing what's going on just helps us learn and do better. Yeah, thank you, and appreciate that your audience is supporting the New Zealand cause at the moment for the fight for the wapiti.
No, you're welcome. You're welcome. Always a pleasure, man. I look forward to the next time, all right?
Thank you, brother. Take care.